Are you ready for the word?
Yes, sir.
I want you to turn to Enoch, chapter 82. LXXX11. II, something. That's on page 106 of your red book. Enoch, chapter 82, verse 1. And now, my son Methuselah, all these things I am recounting to you and writing down for you, and I have revealed to you everything and given you books concerning all these. So preserve, my son Methuselah, the book from your father's hand, and see that you deliver them to the generations of the world. I have given wisdom to you and to your children, and your children that shall be to you, that they may give it to their children for generations. This wisdom, namely, that passes their thought. Think about what he just said. I'm giving to you wisdom that passes their thought. Wisdom that they cannot get just by thinking. This wisdom had to be revealed. It had to come from Yahweh. And He revealed it to me. I wrote it down, he said. And I'm entrusting you, Methuselah, to pass it on until it reaches the hands of those living in the last generation. Verse 3. And those who understand it shall not sleep, but shall listen with the ear, that they may learn this wisdom, and it shall please those that eat thereof better than good food. Wow. Verse 4. Blessed are all the righteous, blessed are all those who walk in the way of righteousness, and sin not as the sinners in the reckoning of all their days. I'm going to stop there for today. All right, what is sin? Transgression of the law. So what is walking in the way of righteousness? Walking in Torah, keeping the law. Enoch sees into our generation, and he's going to see that there are some who get reawakened or awakened again to turn back to Torah. They have been revived to walk in Torah. His book is instruction. His book is revelation. His book is encouragement for those living in our day who have rediscovered Torah. That's what this book is for. Enoch wrote a book that is designed to prepare you and me for the age that we're living in. Now I want to read to you a transcript from a radio broadcast that was done April the 3rd, 1965, by a man no doubt you've heard of, Paul Harvey. It's entitled, If I Were the Devil. If I were the prince of darkness, I'd want to engulf the whole world in darkness. And I'd have 1/3 of its real estate and 4/5 of its population. But I wouldn't be happy until I had seized the ripest apple on the tree, thee. So I'd set about, however necessary, to take over the United States. I'd subvert the churches first. I'd begin with a campaign of whispers. With the wisdom of a serpent, I would whisper to you as I whispered to Eve, do as you please. To the young, I would whisper that the Bible is a myth. I would convince them that man created God instead of the other way around. I would confide that what's bad is good and what's good is square. And to the old, I would teach to pray after me, Our Father who is in Washington. And then I'd get organized. I'd educate authors in how to make lurid literature exciting, so that anything else would appear dull and uninteresting. I'd threaten TV with dirtier movies and vice versa. I'd peddle narcotics to whom I could. I'd sell alcohol to ladies and gentlemen of distinction. I'd tranquilize the rest with pills if I were the devil. If I were the devil, I'd soon have families at war with themselves, churches at war with themselves, nations at war with themselves, until each in turn was consumed. And with promises of higher ratings, I'd have mesmerizing media fanning the flames if I were the devil. If I were the devil, I would encourage schools to refine young intellects, but neglect to discipline emotions. Just let those run wild. Until before you knew it, you'd have to have drug-sniffing dogs and metal detectors at every schoolhouse door. Within a decade, I'd have prisons overflowing. I'd have judges promoting pornography. Soon I could evict God from the courthouse, then from the schoolhouse, and then from the houses of Congress. And in his own churches, I would substitute psychology for religion, and I would deify science. I would lure priests and pastors into misusing boys and girls and church money if I were the devil. If I were the devil, I'd make the symbol of Easter an egg and the symbol of Christmas a bottle. If I were the devil, I'd take from those who have and give it to those who want it, until I had killed the incentive of the ambitious. What will you bet? I could get whole states to promote gambling as a way to get rich. I would caution against extremes in hard work, in patriotism, and moral conduct. I would convince the young that marriage is old-fashioned, that swinging is more fun, that what you see on TV is the way to be, and thus I could undress you in public. And I could lure you into bed with diseases for which there is no cure. In other words, if I were the devil, I'd just keep right on doing what he is doing. Looking back over the last 58 years since that broadcast took place, the clarity with which he described what the devil was doing and what he was seeking to accomplish and what he has accomplished is astounding. This morning, what I would like to do is take the liberty of attempting to use his theme. That radio broadcast came to mind a few days ago. In that broadcast, he warned of what the devil's intentions were for the United States and how the devil would accomplish those intentions. This morning, I would like to warn of the devil's intentions for the book of Enoch and how he has worked to accomplish those intentions. If I were the devil, I would fear, despise, and seek with all of my might to destroy the book of Enoch, lest it fall into the hands and enter into the hearts of those who have turned to Yahweh and returned to Torah. If I were the devil, I'd destroy this book, and if I couldn't destroy it, I use scholars, PhD, and religious leaders to support me in questioning and denying the origin and the holiness of the book, thereby causing men to have no confidence in it. I'd get men to reject what is written in it and to fear reading it and to have contempt for anyone daring to teach it. I would cause them to think they are being holy and loyal to Yahweh and to His Word by rejecting Enoch, when in fact it is I who they're conceding to. If I were the devil, I'd malign this book with all of my might and resources. Because without this book, men would not know the details of my rebellion against Yahweh, nor of the angels I deceived into rebelling with me. There are no other writings that expose my rebellion and their rebellion, as does this book. If I were the devil, I'd malign and get my servants to speak evil of this book, because nowhere else is there a detailed exposing of what I did in Genesis 6. Without this book, men could theorize and imagine and create doctrines that convince people in the pews that all the evil that came upon the earth prior to the flood was caused because Seth's descendants married the daughters of men who had a different faith than they. Without this book, men would not know that 200 of my agents, who were the former watchers of Yahweh, descended upon Mount Hermon and took wives of those whom they chose. Without this book, men would not know that from those unholy, forbidden unions, a hybrid race entered into the earth. Without this book, men would not know of the Nephilim, who grew to heights as tall as the cedars of Lebanon. Without Enoch, men would not know where the legends of Zeus, Apollo, and Hercules, and so many others came from. These men of renown were my creations. These hybrids were my work. I did this that I might cause men to worship gods that they helped to create. Without Enoch, men would not know one thing about demons. Surely these demons are mentioned in the gospel, and certainly the one called the Son of Man and his disciples cast them out of those whom they possessed. But without Enoch, no one would know who they are or where they came from. Without Enoch, men would not know that these are the spirits of the Nephilim, the hybrids that were created by 200 of my agents whom I sent to Mount Hermon. If I were the devil, I'd destroy the book of Enoch. And if I could not destroy it, I'd work with all of my might to discredit its value and credibility. Because without Enoch, men would not understand Sheol and what happens to them when they die. They would not understand Sheol and how there are dwelling places created for the souls of the righteous and separate dwelling places created for the souls of the unrighteous, and that there's a great chasm between them. Oh yes, the Son of Man spoke of it in Luke 16, but that would be dismissed as merely a parable were it not for Enoch's detailed description of that place. If men were to read and understand Enoch, they would fear dying in their sins. They would fear living in violation of Torah. They would fear the death of their bodies if they had not been reconciled to their Creator by the one called the Son of Man. Furthermore, if men were to read and understand Enoch, passages such as Revelation 6 that speak of the souls under the altar crying that their blood might be avenged would seem contradictory and confusing were it not for the revelations that Enoch gives us concerning those souls. If I were the devil, I'd seek to conceal the things that Yahweh and His Holy One shared with Enoch. If I were the devil, I'd fear Enoch because it is he who revealed that it was I and my agents who taught cultic practices to the daughters of men who taught it to others. It was I and my agents who taught witchcraft, sorcery, pharmaceuticals, divination, necromancy. And all of these come forth from the knowledge that we imparted to mankind. Enoch reveals this, and that makes him dangerous to the kingdom of darkness. If I were the devil, I'd resist Enoch with all of my powers, because no one would know what scriptures the Son of Man was referring to in Matthew 22. When my servants the Sadducees presented their case for the foolishness of a resurrection of the dead, the Son of Man chided them for not knowing the scriptures. Yet there are no scriptures anywhere that speak of angels neither marrying nor being given in marriage other than what Enoch shared. If I can convince men that Enoch is not Scripture, that casts doubts on any kind of resurrection and on the Son of Man, because without Enoch, there is no Scripture confirming His words. If I were the devil, for these and many other reasons, I'd use all my powers to destroy Enoch. And here's how I would do it. I'd find every copy of what he wrote and gave to Methuselah and destroy it. And if I couldn't get it from Methuselah, I'd get it from Lamech. And if not from Lamech, then from Noah or one of his 3 sons. But if the copy survived, I could convince men that they were not valid. I'd get my people and my influence into the religious leadership of the Jews. I'd convince them that Yahweh wanted them to create a canon. And with my influence, I'd convince them to not put Enoch in that canon. And though the books that would be put into it would be considered holy, I would convince them that their traditions and doctrines were really of greater value than what they put in. So even though they would have sets of books considered to be inspired, I'd still win because, number one, they would, by their traditions, make void those inspired writings. And number two, Enoch would be excluded. If I were the devil, I'd call the Son of Man and those who followed him simple and uneducated, so that generation after generation would discount their view of Enoch and yield to and accept and promote the views of the Jewish Pharisees and scribes. The Son of Man was correct when he said that the Pharisees and scribes make void the word of Yahweh, and when he said they reject it and make it void and lay it aside. Yet he was correct when he said they teach the doctrines. They teach their doctrines as the commandments of men. They teach for doctrine the commandments of men. This makes the scribes and Pharisees perfect agents for me to use to accomplish removing Enoch from Scripture. By their authority, the masses will follow their lead instead of the lead of those uneducated fishermen whom the Son of Man discipled. If I were the devil, I'd turn the early church fathers against Torah. I'd convince them that the law passed away, yet I'd convince them to keep those original 39 books in their canon. I'd just give them doctrines to explain to their followers why they no longer have to follow the instructions given to them by their Creator. I'd convince them that Yahweh wants them to create a canon that only adds to the 39 approved books, to accept those, but to add their own canon to that canon. Because it is only by the creation of a canon that I can create a system of exclusion that will ensure that Enoch is never accepted. If I were the devil, I'd get them to canonize 27 books and to call the 66 books then inspired. I'd get them to call it the Bible. And thus people would be afraid to read anything outside of the Bible. 66 books. They'd be oblivious as to why I wanted 66 books. I'd make them think that their choosing of 27 was a holy endeavor and cause them to be oblivious to the fact that my servant Gilgamesh is connected to that number. He is recorded in the annals of history as being 2/3 God and 1/3 man. That is my servant. My creation, Gilgamesh, was 66% of my DNA. I'd get them to settle on a 66 book canon and chuckle to myself as they exclude Enoch and other holy writings. If I were the devil, I'd cause Enoch to disappear from view and use all my powers to prevent the hidden copies of it in the Qumran caves from ever being discovered. And if they were discovered, I'd convince ones who I had given great wealth to buy the only complete Aramaic copies and to hide those away so that they could not be studied, so that only the fragmented copies would be given to men. If I were the devil, I'd convince men that Enoch did not write Enoch, but instead it was written by a man who came after Jude and Peter and copied their words, trying to give his book validity. And this I could easily convince men of, as long as the copies of it in the Qumran cave remain hidden. If I were the devil, I'd enlist PhDs and Bible scholars in modern times, just as I did the scribes and Pharisees in ages past, to use their supposed authority and influence to write books and speak at seminars, using their voices to discredit what Yahweh inspired. If I were the devil, I'd raise up my servants on social media to attack the credibility of anyone who discovers this holy manuscript and tries to reintroduce it to the servants of Yahweh. I'd ridicule them. And I'd get them to mindlessly quote the PhDs and scholars who have done my work for me. In other words, if I were the devil, I'd keep right on doing what he's doing. I found a quote this week from a man named Sean Griffin, that's fitting as I bring this to a close. I was not familiar with Sean or his ministry until last Sabbath. I became aware of his ministry and the ministry of another man named Matthew Jansen last week. Glenn and Jay, I think, expressed that y'all were familiar with Sean before, maybe Matthew as well. But I was not. I had not heard of them. This past week, I've spoken to both of them on the phone, and I spent a considerable amount of time consuming the information that they put forth, particularly this week concentrating on information put forth by Sean on his YouTube channel. Concerning the rejection by so many of the book of Enoch, he said this, and I want you to listen carefully because this is powerful. Listen to what he said about the rejection of the book of Enoch and other books. But he said this: too many people lean on the authority of other people to decide for them what is inspired Scripture. I'm going to say that again. Too many people lean on the authority of other people to decide for them what is inspired Scripture. Do you grasp the truth of what he said? Too many people lean on the authority of the scribes and Pharisees to decide for them that they can only read 39 books and no others. They lean on the authority of scribes and Pharisees to tell them that. These same scribes and Pharisees are confronted time and again by our Messiah for their rejection of Holy Scripture. These same scribes and Pharisees would make void the very words of Yahweh in order to keep their traditions and to hold to their own doctrines that they taught as commandments. It is no stretch to believe that not one of the doctrines they taught, let me say it again. It is no stretch to believe that one of the doctrines they taught is Enoch is not Scripture. I listened to Sean earlier this week debate a man who is adamant that Enoch is not inspired Scripture. And Sean made this point to that man, that the scribes and the Pharisees are the one who excluded Enoch, The scribes and the Pharisees are the one who created a canon of what they said were inspired writings, and that these are the very men who Yeshua reproved for their lack of knowledge of Scripture and for their rejection of Scripture. That's a powerful point, don't you think? Right. But the man he was debating, and I won't give you his name, but the man he was debating, very renowned on YouTube, the man he was debating said this in response: while it is true that the Messiah criticized them for rejecting and making void the Scriptures, they never claimed that they did.
Wow.
He said that out loud. While it is true that the Messiah criticized them for rejecting and making void the Scriptures, they never claimed that they did. Do you see the darkness that has blinded his heart and blinded his mind in that statement?
Yes.
He is rejecting the witness of Yeshua concerning the Pharisees. He's rejecting that as being accurate. He stated that they never claimed to reject the Scriptures. He's making this claim so that he can validate his trust in their authority to tell him what he can and cannot read as inspired Scripture. Too many people lean on the authority of the scribes and Pharisees to tell them what is inspired Scripture, and too many people lean on the authority of the church fathers to tell them what is inspired Scripture. Sure, there were some early church fathers who believed that Enoch was inspired. Tertullian, Philo, Melito, Justin Martyr, Clement of Alexander, Irenaeus, and others. There are some who believed Enoch was inspired. But we have to remember that so many of the church fathers were not pure of heart, and their own teachings do not meet the test of Deuteronomy 13. And it's these men who were not pure of heart and whose teachings do not meet the test of Deuteronomy 13. It was these men who played a major role in excluding Enoch. We must not forget that anything that the early church fathers did to create a canon, eventually it had to go through the filter of Constantine and his popes and his bishops before it could move into our day and time. It funneled into Constantine and then came out. Too many people lean on the authority of other men to decide for them what is inspired Scriptures. Caleb Hegg came out with a video this week where he declared the 66 book canon is a hill that I will die on. He's not alone, but he said that. The 66 book canon is a hill that I will die on. That is, there are only 66 books that he considers to be inspired, no others. To which I say to you, the only way a man can hold to such a doctrine is if he got it from other men. He is merely echoing what he read, because he did not get that doctrine from Holy Scripture. There is no place where Yahweh commands men to create a canon.
That's right.
Yahweh does nothing except he first reveal it to his prophets. There is no prophet who prophesied that such a thing would take place. There is no place where Yahweh speaks to any man and tells him There are only 66 books that I want you to consider inspired. Please put them in a canon for me. You and I, raised in mainstream denominations, were conditioned and trained to accept the authority of our denominational leaders, who told us repeatedly that our Bibles have only 66 books. No more, no less. And therefore, the training we received sometimes will rise up in resistance against the book of Enoch. Sometimes our training causes resistance to our considering it to be inspired. We sense resistance in our hearts because we were conditioned that way. It is not because we've read it and found it to be in error. It's not because we've read it and found it to contradict other Holy Scripture. We simply sense a resistance to it because the voices of those in authority who we trusted decided for us we could only read 66 books. But when we realized that the canon was not originated by Yahweh, it was originated by men. And when we realized that many of these men were corrupt and definitely biased, and when we realized the amazing revelations that are presented by Enoch for our generation, and when we realized that it does not conflict with any other holy writings, and when we realized that Enoch was recognized by Jude to be a prophet of Yahweh, and when we realized that Yeshua referenced his writings, and when we realized that Peter referenced his writings, and when we realized that Enoch told Methuselah to make sure that what he saw and heard and wrote down got passed on and carried to our generation, that's when we break free from the influence of the authority of other men who are seeking to tell us what is inspired and not inspired, what we can read and what we can't read.
Amen. Yes.
If I were the devil, I'd create a canon. And I'd convince men that Yahweh sanctioned it. And I'd make sure that Enoch was excluded from it. Just in closing again, reference again. It's men that took books, manuscripts, and put them in here and said they are holy. And then they said they're real holy. And these are the only books that were inspired by Yahweh. These are the only books you need. Well, did Yahweh tell y'all to do that? Well, nobody wanted us to do it. Well, how do you know that He wanted you to do it? Well, because we did it. And so you did it proves that He wanted you to do it. Yes, but He never told you. No. Well, what about these books? Many through the ages have found them to pass a Deuteronomy 13 test. Many through the ages have found that they don't contradict anything else in there, what you're calling the canon. What about these books? Many have found inspiration in them. Many have deemed that Yahweh spoke and did this. Can we put them in there? No, that's holy. You can't touch it. You can't take this one out. And you can't put that one in. Well, who said so? We did. And then if you challenge them on it, the response is always the same. Well, do you read Hebrew? Well, no. Where'd you go to school? How many degrees do you have? You speak Greek? Well, no. But you do, right? Right. And you translated these, right? Now, I can trust your translation to read, right? Well, yeah, but still, you don't read Greek and Hebrew, so you can't decide what's inspired and what's not inspired. They always use their education and their authority to silence you. I agree with Sean. Too many people lean upon the authority of other men to determine for them what is inspired. I'm not going to do that anymore.
Yes, sir.
Do you realize how many people would dare to call us heretics because we dare to say that there are more than 66 inspired books? Well, I'm going to take what Enoch had and what he gave to Methuselah, who gave to Lamech, who gave to Noah, who gave to one of his sons, who gave to generations beyond. I'm going to take that book and I'm going to read it. That book that has been attacked from generation to generation, so much so that it had to be hidden. And no matter how much the devil hoped that you and I wouldn't find it, it got found. So I agree now with Enoch. When Enoch said in chapter 82, we ought not sleep until we read it and understand it. It is better for us than food. Yahweh bless you and keep you. Yahweh make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. Yahweh lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. As his name is put upon you, so shall he himself bless you.